Please rise and join me in the pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 37th day of the 106th Legislature, first session. Our chaplain today is Reverend Andrew Garricky from Mount Calvary Lutheran Church in Omaha in Senator Howard's district. Would you please rise?
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, you have given us this good land as our heritage. You have blessed the inhabitants of this nation and of the world through her bounty, acts of compassion, and the defense of the helpless and oppressed. For this we give you thanks and praise. Yet we are a people riven by violence, discord, and confusion. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. We increasingly call good that which is evil. We mock your institution of holy marriage. We permit the unjust slaughter of millions of holy innocents, and we wantonly pursue the fleeting vanities of wealth, pleasure, and power. Have mercy on us. Bring us back from the path of destruction. Give your wisdom to those entrusted with the authority of government, that there may be true and godly justice and peace in our land. Break and hinder every evil plan and purpose of the devil, the world, and our sinful flesh, which would divide us from one another and from you. Though we are poor sinners, you despise nothing you have made, and forgive the sins of all who are penitent. Create in us new and contrite hearts, that lamenting our sins and acknowledging our wretchedness, we may receive from you full pardon and forgiveness. We ask this for the sake of him who shed his blood for us, Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Pastor Garricky. I call to order the 37th day of the 106th Legislature, first session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call.
There is a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
No corrections this morning.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
Mr. President, priority bill designation, Senator Kolowski has selected LB 619, Senator Blood, LB 138. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We'll proceed to the first item on the agenda. Excuse me, one moment.
Thank you.
While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LR 30, LR 31, and LR 32. Mr. Clerk, first item.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 339, introduced by Senator Lathrop. It's a bill for an act relating to judges, to change provisions relating to judicial nominating commissions, to eliminate obsolete provisions, repeal original sections. The bill was introduced on January 16th of this year, referred to the Judiciary Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with no committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Lathrop, you're welcome to open.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Good morning. I'm going to introduce LB 339. This is a cleanup bill. Very, very simple. If we had a consent calendar, this thing would be on it. LB 339 is a cleanup bill that addresses an oversight from last year's passage of LB 697, which adjusted a few judicial district boundaries as recommended by the Judicial Resource Commission. Those changes should have included an adjustment to the membership of the Judicial Nominating Commission that helps select judges for the various districts. LB 339 makes a small change to align the commission with the updated district boundaries that happened in that bill last year. That bill, which was LB 697, moved Otoe County District Court into the 1st Judicial District, which covers most of southeast Nebraska, and out of the 2nd District, which is Sarpy and Cass counties. That change by design did not include Otoe County's county court, just its district court. But there was an oversight and no one changed the makeup of the Judicial Nominating Commission for the Otoe County District Court to reflect its new judicial district. LB 339 advanced from the committee on a 7-0 vote with no opposition at the hearing. Again, this is a technical change to clean up an oversight in a bill that passed last year by this legislature, LB 697. And with that, I would encourage your support for LB 339. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, I do have amendments to LB 339. Senator LeGrone would offer AM 416.
Senator LeGrone, you're welcome to open on your amendment.
Mr. President. Colleagues, I don't intend for any of these amendments this morning to pass. In fact, I would encourage you to vote them down when we get to them. But I agree with Senator Lathrop that this is a cleanup bill, and I am in support of the bill. But it does raise an issue that I think does not get addressed enough in this body and has gone long overlooked, that I think we need to take a look at. And that is the transparency of our judicial nominating commissions. And so essentially I think the main issue is that I would submit that most people don't even know that these commissions exist. I think that probably a lot of members in this body this morning is the first time that they are hearing of these commissions. And if that's the case, I guarantee you that your average citizen also is completely unaware that these commissions are even out there. And I think that's a problem for a couple reasons. Number one, when we're looking at just the foundations of our government, which we'll get into more this morning, the whole point of a democratic system is that you have popular buy-in to the governmental institutions for all three branches of government. And we can cover that more in depth. And if the citizenry is completely unaware of how our judges are selected, I think that decreases the it brings into question the whole goal of that process. And to be clear, we're going to hear a lot about the merit selection plan this morning, and I think that is the best way to select judges. That is what ensures that we have an independent judiciary. I just think that there's probably more that we can do in terms of ensuring that that process is functioning properly. And so how a judicial nominating commission works is the governor appoints 4 citizen members, and then you have 4 attorney members that are elected by the members of the bar. They're elected on a partisan ballot. And then you have a judge of the Supreme Court sit as the chair of the commission. And there's some more technical stuff about terms and term limits and items like that that isn't really relevant for this discussion. But essentially, the attorney members are elected on a partisan ballot. But how that election occurs is they are elected to represent that party on the commission. But everyone can vote for both parties. What that means is all of the Democratic lawyers can vote for the Republican members, and all the Republican members can vote for the Democratic lawyers. And so that's specifically the issue that this amendment calls into question. And again, that's a broader issue that we can talk about more later. And when we actually get to a vote on this amendment, I would encourage you to vote it down because I think it would be better addressed as a standalone bill at another time. So that's the general makeup of a judicial nominating commission. Now, getting into exactly how that looks in terms of citizens and how they understand how this works, if you compare that to the federal system, obviously, the federal system, the president simply nominates a judge, and then there's confirmation by the Senate. In our system, you have a judicial nominating commission for each judgeship, and applicants for a vacancy apply. Those applications go to the nominating commission. And then the nominating commission filters applicants that then the governor may pick from to nominate for that position. In our system, we have retention elections rather than a confirmation process through the legislative body. So that's when you go and you look on your ballot and you see all these judges shall judge so-and-so be retained, and then you vote yes or no. That's how we do the check rather than a confirmation process. But with so much, because the initial process really happens behind closed doors, and to be very clear, there's nothing. I'm not implying that there's anything nefarious going on. I'm simply saying it's difficult for your average citizen to understand the process. But since so much of it goes on behind closed doors, your average citizen doesn't a lot of times get to, one, they're probably not even aware the commission exists. 2, they probably have no idea there's even a vacancy in whatever judgeship. And then finally, 3, the proceedings of the commission itself are kept from the public. So that really raises a lot of transparency issues. But getting back initially into the foundation, so I think the best way to address this is first to look at the assumptions that underlie what we require in terms of public buy-in and democratic legitimacy in our institutions. Then second, to look at how the evolution of judicial appointments in this country, and then finally, specifically how it applies to our process. So first, we're going to delve in slightly to the political foundations. And obviously, I know that many people are, in this body have seen a number of aspects of political theory about the need for buy-in from members of the public, and there's much literature that you can go into on that. But that obviously underlays the whole foundation of our country with the need for essentially when we broke away from the United Kingdom, the desire to have everyday citizens have a say in how their government operates. So obviously we have three branches of government. The legislature, I think it's pretty clear how you get public buy-in there. The executive, also incredibly clear how you get public buy-in there. In fact, at the state level, you even get more public buy-in than you do at the federal level. The federal level, obviously, a lot of the executive offices are filled by appointment and then confirmation. Here we have direct election for a lot of those offices: attorney general, treasurer, auditor, etc. When it comes to the judgeships, though, they do operate through that process that I was laying out earlier of the Judicial Nominating Commission filtering the field and then the governor making a choice. Now, I think that is a better process because a lot of states, they have state elections for judges. Now, that creates obviously a lot of problems. You can have political influences insert themselves into those elections, which they inevitably do, and that really tends to politicize the judiciary. You could have a judge, as you saw over in Iowa, make a ruling and then have that ruling be the issue of an election that next cycle, which may or may not have been a ruling based upon the merit of the case, but it's certainly, if you have an election, is not a ruling that is independent of political pressures. Now, I want to talk a little, now we'll get into a little about how we came to a merit selection plan in our state. And essentially what happened is back when the foundation of the country, before the revolution even, how you got judges was they were purely appointed by the executive. And that's obviously the mechanism that we still use at the federal level and in some states. This, back in England, they didn't have three branches of government. In fact, initially they only had two. Initially they only had one, and then eventually they got the legislative, and then the courts. Their final court, the law lords, really were part of that legislative branch. They actually didn't become an independent, separate branch until I believe the mid-'90s when they were split out of the House of Lords. But certainly back in the late 1600s, early 1700s, when people started to come to the United States, which obviously then was not yet the United States, they were appointed by the king to handle various needs. That was actually one of the issues in the revolution. So it was just natural as we became a country. I'll turn my light on, Mr. President. For those positions to still be filled.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator LeGrone. Senator Linehan would like to recognize Dr. Gilbert Head of Elkhorn, who's serving as the family physician of the day. He is seated under the north balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized by the Nebraska Legislature? Returning to discussion, Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. First of all, Mr. President, can I get a gavel? Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. I rise today in support of Senator Lathrop's LB 339, but the point of discussion I wanted to make here is largely, this is my first opportunity to speak since the events that ended our session yesterday morning. And I just wanted to kind of talk about this as a body. I know I sent out an email to all of you referencing kind of my historical context for why I thought full and fair debate had happened. And I understand that we as a body get to decide every year anew with new members, our new norms, our new traditions, how rules are going to be interpreted and how rules are going to be applied. But I think we're at a fundamental inconsistency with how two rules can be applied and were applied yesterday. Yesterday, a motion to call the question was ruled lack of full and fair debate because there were 14 people still in the queue. I think that's a fair interpretation. I don't necessarily dispute that more senators desiring to speak might be indicative of full and fair debate not having happened. But Those 14 senators were never going to speak anyways. At most, 2 or 3 of them were. Because we had another rule where a bill comes off the debate after 3 hours. So if we've decided that 3 hours is as much time as we're willing to spend on a bill, I don't know how 3 hours of debate on that bill can't be considered full and fair debate enough for a motion to call the question. Colleagues, I'm happy to operate under whatever set of rules and whatever set of norms, whatever set of traditions we all operate under. I am happy to do whatever we as a body, whatever we as this 106th legislature first session decide to do. But we should have some clarity and we should have some thought on what we are going to try and do. And now don't mistake this for sour grapes, because it was the underlying bill was a bill I cared about and it wasn't moving forward. I knew when I called the question yesterday, I knew when we approached the 3-hour deadline, it was going away one way or the other. So the end result didn't surprise me, and it's not something that necessarily upset me because I had spent the morning preparing for it. It was the process that we got there at the end of the day that caught me off guard and surprised me. As you know, calling the question on the underlying bill is something we've done before. It's something we've had happen before. It is not an unusual tradition. It is not an unusual thing. That's, in fact, the purpose of the motion. And in past, when things have been, quote-unquote, filibustered or extended debate, as you want to call it, the tradition has been to file multiple amendments, such as Senator LaGrone has done this morning with multiple amendments he's indicated he wants us to vote against to prevent the underlying bill from having the question called and moved forward. Now, if we're going to kind of just move away from calling the question, that's something we can do as a body. But I just want that to kind of be on the back of everybody's minds when somebody else wants to call the question later on a different bill, and maybe we've had an hour and a half of debate and there's 6 people left in the queue. How are we going to rule then, and how are we going to think then? Honestly, I think if you've got the 5 hands and it's something, if you've got the 5 hands and you've gotten into the space where multiple people are speaking for the second and third time, that's probably a pretty good spot. Obviously, we have the rule there to protect people from calling the question immediately after an opening and things of that nature. So I do understand the need for discretion for the chair, and I do understand that in each individual situation, the chair may change who exactly is sitting in the chair and who is the presiding officer. And this is not a rebuke at any single one individual. But if we're going to have a rule that a bill gets 3 hours of debate.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. If we're going to have a rule that bill gets 3 hours of debate, finished, done, finito, and all of a sudden a higher vote standard applies, and then we're going to also acknowledge that 3 hours of debate is not full and fair debate, those two things are incongruent in my mind. Those 14 people who still wanted to talk on LB 627 were never going to get a talk on LB 627 unless they started jumping up and doing it in other bills. And that's just something I think we're going to have to be conscious of in the future when future motions and future bills are to be debated. Whether you support or oppose each individual bill, I would like you to have that in the back of your mind. With that, I support LB 339, and thank you for your time this morning, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. I'm not exactly sure why this is turning into 3 amendments, to be honest with you, but it sounds like it's going to be used as an opportunity to talk about how we select judges. And I want to take this opportunity to talk to you about our system relative to the 2 other possibilities. You have the federal system that requires the Senate's approval, right? President nominates someone, they got to go through a process in the Senate, which we're all familiar with, and if they can make it through there, then they become a judge. There are other states that have elected judges. We do not want anything to do with that. Those guys are out raising money, they're fundraising. As a lawyer, I can tell you, I've talked to lawyers that practice in those jurisdictions where the judges run on the ballot. It's a terrible idea to have a judge out soliciting donations, and now you expect them to be completely neutral arbiter of decisions or disputes before them. And then we have Nebraska's system. Nebraska's system is called the Missouri Plan. Basically, the way the plan works is you have a judicial nominating commission. By the way, these people do not meet in secret. There are lawyers that choose who the lawyers are going to be, and there are civilians that are chosen who are going to serve. So there's a mix of civilians and lawyers, all people interested in the process. They interview candidates so that when there's an opening, let's say there's an opening for a district court judge, which there will be hopefully at the end of the session, the commission will meet and they will interview all the people that want to be a judge. There might be 8 people that come forward, and the job of the commission is to determine who are the qualified folks whose names should be forwarded to the governor. They listen to them, they take testimony, they hear their qualifications, they make a decision, they meet after they have heard people, pro and con, about each of the nominees. The commission, again made up of lawyers and civilians, overseen by a Supreme Court justice, then forwards names down to the governor for appointment. The governor then interviews them. It's called the Missouri Plan. It is unquestionably, colleagues, the best plan in the country. And it's not unique to Nebraska. In fact, they call it the Missouri Plan. And it takes the politics out of these appointments, other than the governor gets to choose from among the qualified candidates who to pick. And typically, historically, but not always, they choose somebody from their own party. So it's not like the governor's having to pick judges that he wouldn't like, doesn't like, don't philosophically align with the governor. They get that opportunity after the field has been winnowed by this commission, and this stuff isn't done in secret. The fact that people don't participate or know about it isn't any different than when the Game and Parks Commission meets and you have 4 people in the room. So we do not want to tinker with the system in place in Nebraska. It is the best of all 3 systems, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. And with that, I guess, and again, the underlying bill here is a cleanup bill. It literally changes 1 numeral in a section, and I'm happy to answer questions to the extent any of Senator LaGrone's commentary this morning causes you any concern or leads to any questions about this process. I'm happy to answer questions you may have on or off the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator LaGrone, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I actually agree with 99.9% of what Senator Lathrop just said. The only thing I would disagree with would be it's not any different if people don't participate in this process, and that's what I wanted to get into a little bit. I do completely agree that it is the best way to select judges. I completely agree that it takes the politics out of it. I just think there are some transparency issues that have come up, not just in Nebraska, but with a number of states that use the Missouri Plan. And I think that we'd be wise to discuss those and see if there's a way that they can or that they should or can be addressed. And again, that's probably something that needs legislation as a separate bill next year. But I think it is important to take a look at it now. So last time I spoke, I brought us to the point where we were essentially talking about how judges are appointed in the early parts of this country, at times of this country. And now I want to look at the changes that happened with that. So essentially, obviously, as the country grew older, more states were admitted. They each wrote their own constitutions. There were some variations in how that process took place. There are some that chose to elect judges. I agree with Senator Lathrop that that is a bad idea. And then there was some push for reform to go even further and take politics out of the process by looking for some merit-based method to select judges. And that really began with Missouri, as Senator Lathrop indicated. And just to give a little history on it, I'll just read from a law review article on the topic. So in 1940, the state of Missouri reformed its method of selecting judges in its Supreme Court and other designated courts in an effort to insulate the judiciary from partisan politics and assure judicial independence. Missouri's system proved to be an influential innovation that it spearheaded a broader mid-20th century court reform movement. Among its key features, Missouri's approach entrusts a nominating commission to the authority to recommend a slate of qualified judicial candidates from which the state's governor makes a selection. Other than one judicial member, no commission member is permitted to hold public office, and excuse me, and no member may hold an official position in a political party. And this is from Missouri's Constitution that this is talking about. The chosen judge later runs in a retention election in which the electorate registers its views concerning the judicial performance. Unless a majority of voters vote against the retention, the judge continues to serve a full term of office. In a practice recently formalized by the Missouri Supreme Court rule, the public's decision on retention is aided by published data. And would Senator Lathrop yield to a question? If he's
Senator Lathrop,
here.
would you please yield if you're on the floor?
If he's not,
I don't see him at this time.
Senator Hilgers might be able to answer my question. Senator Hilgers, would you yield to a question?
Senator Hilgers, would you please yield?
I would.
So thank you, Senator Hilgers. So we know that in Missouri there's published data that goes along with these retention elections on the judges' decisions. Correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have that in Nebraska with our judicial retention elections, do we?
Don't have what with our judicial retention elections? I'm sorry.
In Missouri, the article I was reading indicated that they are required to publish data, evidence-based data regarding the judges.
Right. No, you're right. We don't have that here.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Hilgers. I just wanted to confirm that as I passed over it. And so that's to insulate members of the judiciary from excess of from contested partisan elections. Embracing the Missouri plan as state's nonpartisan commission-based method for selecting judges came to be known, 36 states, in addition to the District of Columbia, have adopted a form of judicial nominating commissions. And of these jurisdictions, 16 also use retention elections. Obviously, Nebraska is one of those jurisdictions. The plan drew inspiration in turn from the progressive era good government campaigns and their technocratic, expert-driven solutions to problems of public policy and administration. By removing the courts from the potentially corrosive effects. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator LeGrone. Senator Chambers, you're recognized. Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, I support this bill, and I'm not going to get in that part of the discussion, but since Senator Hansen, number one, as opposed to Senator Hansen, our new one, yesterday I did not vote to overrule the chair. I was strongly and am always strongly in favor of what Senator Pansing Brooks' bill was attempting to do. But I listened very carefully to what the speaker said, and for me, what he said was correct. I have to take the long-range view. The bill was not going to go anywhere. I will not vote a certain way just to impress other people, but I am concerned about our procedures, our processes, and I'm one who would be very, very offended if somebody could call the question at any point in the discussion and shut off debate. I'm so often on the small end of the vote that the only chance I have to even speak is because of the amount of time that we are allotted. And I don't like the speaker's current program because I want the full 8 hours on general file on a bill. Once we start, I don't want to see a vote allowed to move that bill or in debate until we've had the full 8. But what he has presented is better than nothing. And I do not want and I will not support anything that makes it easier to shut off debate. There are too many times the rest of you, for whatever reason, have, if not unanimity, at least such a large consensus that you will easily have 25 votes. You could shut down everything. There was one occasion, I forget exactly what it was, but a former U.S. district judge in Nebraska had mentioned me by name in the context of legislative debate. And he acknowledged, not acknowledged, he just verified that in the legislature is where there should be robust, untrammeled discussion of the issues. This is the only place it's going to be in a democracy, as you all call it. Although what the Constitution guarantees to every state is a Republican form of government, and it mentions that word specifically, but not democratic anywhere, which shows that when we talk about civics, those of us who are on the floor discussing civics need to learn a little bit about the subject which civics embraces, and that'll never happen. But I do know from experience that it is not a good practice to allow somebody to just call the question and get 5 people to agree. I might be the only one discussing an issue. That doesn't mean that I'm wrong. It doesn't mean that my discussion is not pertinent. The example I'll give is one that dealt with what was then called late-term abortion. I was the only one who voted against the bill. I was the one doing most of the debating. But as it turned out, I, who was the only one voting against it, was the one who was correct. And that was confirmed by the District Court of Nebraska, the 8th U.S. Circuit, of which Nebraska is a part, then the U.S. Supreme Court, and all 3 of those courts made reference to some of the comments that I made during that debate. Whenever an attempt is to cut off the debate too early, I will object to it. And if it does happen over my argument or opposition, then I will get my revenge. I will get my time on other bills. And I'm just saying that. And I did tell the Speaker that I listened to him carefully, and he swayed me. I was not going to vote, but I would have explained why I would not vote at all. I support the bill that we were talking about, but what's more important to me in the long run is our process, and I do support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Hilgers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I appreciate Senator Matt Hansen's comments, and I actually appreciate that he opened the door a little bit. Before I comment on his comments, I guess I'll say something about LB 339, which I certainly support, and I agree with Senator Lathrop's comments regarding I think the importance and value of our system, especially compared to systems in which judges are elected. One state that has elected judges is Texas. And I think it's a very bad system when you have when you think of your courtrooms as a place where you obtain justice, and to have lawyers arguing in a particular courtroom, and those lawyers have contributed maybe significant sums of money to the judge who is deciding the particular issue at hand. So I think our system is far superior to those systems in which judges are elected. With that being said, I appreciate the comments from Senator Hansen this morning, as well as Senator Chambers, and I do think it's important. And I read Senator Hansen's note that he sent around to the body yesterday with the transcript from a debate that we had in 2017, and I appreciate that we're having the opportunity to have this discussion on the mic this morning, because this transcript may be read, and hopefully will be read, by either members of this body in the years to come or those who will replace us as we debate this question of when to call the question under what circumstances. And I think the rule is pretty clear that we have given in our rules the discretion to the chair when to determine that there is there has been debate on the particular question at hand. And I think it was well within the president's discretion yesterday to determine that with 14 people still in the queue, that we had not had full and fair debate on that particular question. Now, the counter argument, as I sort of understand it, is, well, because of the 3-hour rule from the Speaker, which actually is not a rule in our rule book, in and there was no rule, as far as I can remember, that was proposed this year to the Rules Committee to either take that power away from the Speaker or to have some different rule. But because of that 3-hour rule, that would pull it off the debate, it's possible that those individuals would never have a chance to speak anyway, and so it's sort of incongruous. And I think what would certainly be true is if the motion to cease debate, calling of the question, would have been successful, those people absolutely would not have had the chance to speak. So I think on the one hand, we had certainty that those folks would not have had the opportunity to be able to be heard. On the other hand, it certainly is possible that there were, on any particular question, there would be enough votes for the issue to be brought back to the floor where we could have further debate. I do think that ultimately the objection, as I hear it, is more towards the 3-hour rule than it is to whether the question should have been called yesterday. And I think that as we operate under these rules, and we have reelected the Speaker, and he was very transparent about the way that he was going to conduct business in this body, and he has throughout his tenure as Speaker, both the last 2 years and this year as well, and I think has applied these rules very fairly and transparently. But so long as that rule is in place, had we overruled the chair, I think what we would have done is what I mentioned yesterday, which is essentially created the potential for a 2-hour or 2-hour 45-minute cloture rule. And one that, in other words, you get to vote to the underlying bill after 2 hours and 40 minutes because it might get pulled off after 3 hours. Now, you can avoid that, as Senator Matt Hansen mentioned, by filing dilatory amendments, but I don't think we ought necessarily be encouraging the filing of dilatory amendments in 2 hours into a particular discussion. As I understand, I wasn't here on Monday, but at one point the queue was actually, there were only a few people who were in the queue maybe on Monday, so it's possible we could have gotten to a vote. But if we're creating a system in which we're encouraging dilatory amendments to avoid calling the question after 2.5 hours on the underlying bill, I don't think that's a good system. So ultimately, the rule worked as intended. I don't see any reason to deviate. Thank you, Mr. President. I don't see any reason to deviate from that rule. I will, as a brief comment to the information Senator Matt Hansen sent around yesterday, and I read it briefly, so Senator Hansen can certainly correct me. The issue of calling the question last time around was relating to a poll motion where the Speaker had actually identified an hour window in which we were going to debate that issue, and one way or the other we were going to vote on it after an hour. And ultimately, it was Senator Burkhart at the time who had a motion to overrule the chair, and he withdrew that particular motion. So I think that's a nice data point on this, and I think the discussion, I thank Senator Hansen for both taking the time to send around the research yesterday, having the conversation on the floor this morning. I think this is exactly the type of conversations we ought to have here in this body as we think about how to apply our rules. Ultimately, I think we made the right decision yesterday in not overturning the chair's decision, which I think was right on. And with that, I will yield my time back to the chair. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hilger. Senator Bowles, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to briefly rise in support of Senator Hansen and his observations on our process and procedure. One of the things that I think is important to note and important for us to think about is that under our current process, if we have 3 hours of debate, the threshold for a vote to move a bill forward moves from 25, the simple majority, to 30 or 33 to get it back on the agenda. And I think there are some bills that are substantive. There are some bills that are meaningful that deserve significant debate. Yesterday, when we had debate on LB 627, I thought it was excellent debate. There were sincere policy, data-driven questions brought up on the floor. I would still like to see more opportunity for debate on that substantive issue and agree with some of the concerns brought up today. So I have had a conversation with Speaker Scheer about these issues. I do think that the more we talk to each other and look for opportunities to have sincere, substantive debate on the issues that are important to us and our constituents, the better for Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bowles. Senator LaGrone, you're recognized. And this would be your third attempt.
Thank you, Mr. President. So getting back where we left off with the Missouri plan, and real quick, I just want to reiterate again, I completely agree with Senator Lathrop and Senator Hilgers that this is we do have the best method for nominating judges. My question is, can we make it more transparent and thereby better? So getting back into the article, Excuse me. Embracing the Missouri Plan as the state's nonpartisan commission-based method for selecting judges came to be known. Again, we covered that in 36 states, progressive era. By removing the courts from the potentially corrosive effects of electoral politics, this court reform initiative rejected the anti-professional, anti-hierarchical ideology of the era of Jacksonian democracy that, in the mid-19th century, had advocated for the popular election of judges. And again, I think that Senator Lathrop and Senator Hilgers have done a good job of explaining why that's a bad idea. And I'll just keep going. In the steps taken to insulate the judiciary from partisan politics, both in the initial designation and in the retention determination, the plan is frequently referred to as merit-based selection. And now the article starts to take a turn into what it identifies as some concerns with the merit-based selection plan. And I'm not saying that these are all concerns with the plan. I'm simply pointing out that these are some that others have raised as concerns. When we get to the end of it, I'll talk more about which ones I agree with and disagree with. In the 2010 U.S. election cycle, a campaign that identified judicial accountability as a key concern altered the tenor of nonpartisan judicial selection. Supporters of this campaign spent generously on heated retention election advertising to unseat incumbent judges on the basis of rulings considered to be activist. These retention election expenditures and the intensity of the anti-incumbent messages they have underwritten are generally regarded to be unusual in the states that have adopted the Missouri Plan system. They expose the judiciary to the very dynamics surrounding political processes that Missouri and other reform states had determined were a threat to judicial independence. Underpinning the anti-retention advertising that targets specific judges is a broader challenge to the method of selecting state judges. Judicial accountability advocates favor modification of current methods of selecting members of judicial nominating commissions that accord lawyers a structural role. They argue that these changes would make the judges nominated through this process more responsive to the broader swath of the state's population. To this end, they have launched ballot petition drives, commenced litigation, and proposed legislation to challenge nonpartisan judicial election methods allegedly dominated by members of the legal profession and that reduce the input of the general electorate. And I want to be very clear. Again, I think that our system of having half the members of these commissions being lawyers elected by other lawyers is a good method to ensure that they do have the merits necessary, but I do think that there is some merit to ensuring that the general public has more buy-in and that these commissions might be not necessarily responsive to their political leanings, but more the public could be more aware of how the process works. The article...
1 minute.
And I'll just skip ahead here. This section describes... so this section of the article that I'm going to get into now talks about the current landscape of judicial accountability advocacy. It talks about developments in selected Missouri Plan states and talks about the measures that have been proposed in those. So some analysts of nonpartisan judicial selection highlight the mismatch that exists between the ideal of judicial independence and an understanding of accountability linked to a democratic impulse. Under this view, judges who issue rulings with a gesture toward the popular will must manage that impulse while recognizing the risks such a gesture presents to the independence needed to carry out the judiciary's unique role in interpreting law, including law that is unclear or ill-defined. Other commentators see complements rather than conflict between these imperatives.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator LeGrone. Senator DeBoer would like to welcome 75 fourth graders from Heritage Elementary in Bennington, along with 25 sponsors. They are in the north balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized by the Nebraska Legislature? Thank you all for coming down. Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. I appreciate the comments we've heard so far on this process, and since I was not necessarily planning on talking a second time, but since I've been mentioned a couple times, I thought I would. Throughout the past couple years, I have multiple times been a supporter of longer debate, just recognizing that there are issues on this floor that are substantive enough, complex enough, important enough that more time would be necessary. I'm sure those of you who remember some of the budget debate we've had, I was criticized on this floor for indicating that a 3-hour filibuster, 3-hour cloture rule on select file was too soon. Multiple senators rebuked me for saying that, saying I was just trying to waste time and we just needed to move on. And then this year in the Rules Committee, we had some proposals to put some more time limits in the rules. And I supported lengthier time limits, and I would have supported, Senator Chambers mentioned, the 8 hours in general file. That is a practice that I think worked well my first 2 years here. And I think there are occasionally issues that are complex enough and substantive enough that you could have multiple hours of true debate on the floor that we could do for this body. I think 627 genuinely could have had more time for debate and discussion. And I have no problem having longer discussion, and am wary about it being arbitrarily cut off. But we have set some standards where it is arbitrarily cut off, just in ways that don't allow an up or down vote. And that's the part that I have an issue at, where we're saying it's full and fair debate. You can't call the question because full and fair debate is happening, but we're not going to reschedule that debate. But we're not going to allow Senator Pansing Brooks an up and down vote on her bill, which was discussed without amendment, without motion, without any added complexities, on a bill that was near identical to bills that have been introduced in the past, saying no, this issue is still so complex and we're still debating it so significantly, a vote right now is improper. I don't think that the early calling the question on the underlying bill, to Senator Hilger's points, I don't think that's the thing that enforces an early cloture rule. I think it's that threshold to reschedule things for the agenda that forces kind of a de facto early cloture rule. Now, I know the Speaker here has indicated that it's not exactly 33 votes, it's within sight of 33 votes or some standard that has a little bit of flexibility, but it's still more than 25. So Senator Pansing Brooks either was going to get an up and down vote by 11:23 yesterday, or was going to need to show approximately 30 votes at 11:24 to get it rescheduled. That's the thing that forced the vote standard. That's the thing that changed how debate run. Now, I do think it was probably proper for the Speaker to rule that there was not full and fair debate yesterday at cloture. Sorry, not at cloture, when I called the question. And actually, in retrospect, I don't know if I had to do it again today and I knew that's the way the ruling was come out, I don't know if I would challenge the ruling of the chair. Because that was pretty substantial and could lay some pretty significant precedent. But in the moment, knowing that we had an opportunity for a vote and it was being denied because of one 3-hour standard but not allowed because 3 hours, a different 3-hour standard, was just so surprising and confusing to me in the moment, I thought it was worth a discussion. I would have liked a little bit more discussion on it yesterday before that vote, but I understand we were, it was a confusing enough method. I do appreciate both Speaker Scheer and Senator Hilger speaking on it at that time. I just want to come on and think about this as all of our rules, whether they're, thank you, Mr. President, whether they're written, whether they're informal, whether they're norms, whether they're the Speaker's determination, all interact in concert. And if we're going to say that something with 3 hours is still having substantive, full and fair debate with many senators being able to debate and discuss it, that's great. But then when it doesn't get scheduled again, that's the part that gets tough with me. And I'm okay with things coming off the agenda if our time is so important that 3 hour needs to be the rule. But then I have a hard time going the opposite direction, saying we can't call the question at 3 hours. I think us as a body need to have some discussion on which way we want to break on those two issues, because they're at some butting heads. And that's just kind of my thoughts to have everybody ponder as we move forward. We've got many more days this session to have some of these decisions. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, since we're on this tangent now, I may as well make it clear how I operate and how I will continue to operate. I had given the example of a year when my bill to outlaw mountain lion hunting was not being handled in the way that I thought. So what I did was had the exact text of that proposed bill drafted as an amendment to any number of other bills. And because I knew I wouldn't have enough votes to pass my bill, I wanted to have the opportunity to discuss it and put into the record my reasoning, and anybody else who is not a member of the committee that killed that bill to have their opportunity to speak also. That can be done by anybody. There are going to be bills, and my colleagues know what those bills are, where you will never get 25 votes from the makeup of this legislature. The most you can do is use the opportunity to convert the legislature into what has been referred to, where presidents are concerned, as a bully pulpit. In order to do that, you must find a way to bring your issue before the legislature. If you tried to do it by discussing it while other bills are before us, as is happening with Senator Lathrop's bill here, you cannot focus as you want to. But if you use my methodology, your proposal is the one that will be before the legislature. Now, as you've witnessed, many of the senators will leave the chamber. But when that occurs, it makes me no difference. My tactic is used to get my pound of flesh from the legislature. When you have a finite or specific number of days in the legislative session, time is of the essence. Time is extremely important. Time is the most valuable commodity. No matter what the speaker may put on the agenda, if a person is determined to use the time, that person will find a way to do it and will have the backbone, the nerve, the determination to follow through on it. If you don't mean to follow through, don't do it. You'll be seen as somebody who makes pointless promises, pointless threats, pointless warnings when you're upset and in the heat of the moment. What you have to show is that you can be as calm as a pool of water on a windless day, but everything you say has as much meaning as if you were roaring like the waves on an ocean when there's a great storm. So, if this bill that Senator, well, I won't say Senator, I don't know which one I ought to call. The bill is Senator Pansing Brooks' bill. Senator Hansen has an interest in it. So I will identify it as the bill of the one who introduced it. If there is to be a vote on her bill, there's a way to get it, but people can slide out of voting against the amendment by saying they're voting against the process that's being used. We all know that that's a sham, but it gives the opportunity to present and discuss the issue. And I have a feeling that my mountain lion bill may have to stalk through this chamber by way of the amendment process. I'm not sure, so I will not state at this moment what I will do if that becomes necessary. Should it become necessary, you will see it. The reason I'm saying this now, is to let Senator Pansing Brooks, Senator Hansen, and others who feel deeply about the subject matter of her bill, which did not get a vote. There are ways to bring it before the body, but it depends on how much will you have and how much the bill really means to you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Hilgers are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. I didn't intend to rise a second time on this particular issue, but I wanted to just maybe tie off a loose end or two from Senator Matt Hansen's comments, which I deeply appreciate. And I do think that this is very important. Our rules, how they're interpreted, what precedents we have, really guides the work of this body. And I can't thank Senator Hansen enough for having this dialogue, because in order to have any good process, having good, transparent rules that apply in as many situations in which they can apply as may be possible. Not all rules apply in all instances that are known to the body, I think, are incredibly important. I don't think it does this body any good for some of the body to be uncertain about how rules will be applied, how rules what rules exist, how they might be applied, or in what circumstances, and then what sort of actions you might take in response to those potential rulings or rules. And so I think this whole discussion is really important. I know we had the discussion yesterday on the underlying bill, but I think going forward, how our rules are going to be interpreted in future contexts, I think is very important. I do want to correct the record, given the importance of the record here this morning. I do want to correct the record relating to last year's discussion, or maybe 2 years ago, and I had said after the hour there was going to be a vote on the poll motion, and that was incorrect. There was only an hour scheduled for debate, and if you go back to the transcript, what was clear is the debate was only meant to be on the process of polling the bill, not on the underlying bill, which is why 1 hour was scheduled. But there was no guarantee that there was going to be a vote, and to that extent, I stated otherwise, and that was incorrect. I do want to correct that. Ultimately, I think sort of my point on the sort of de facto filibuster, and this is why I know Senator Hansen and I maybe disagree, or maybe we don't actually. I just maybe we're talking past each other a little bit. What I'm suggesting is that if the chair would have ruled otherwise, and we would have ceased debate, one of two things would have happened. One would be, we would have essentially what if there was a filibuster of the underlying bill. And remember, I think this is really important procedurally. There was no amendment on the bill, and there were no motions on the bill. And so the question that was being called was not on an amendment, which may have led to a different result, but it was on the bill itself. So what would happen is one of two things, and I think the second is more likely what would happen in the future. One thing that would happen is it would encourage sort of using the calling of the question as an early de facto cloture vote. So instead of going 6 hours or whatever the time limit is, you would have a calling of the question 2 hours and 40 minutes in. And even if there's 20 people who want to speak, or 10 people want to speak, or it's very complex, and there's a filibuster, you would get essentially a vote that would cease debate and go, and you would vote on the underlying bill. Because that would be one likelihood, I think what would happen is those who are filibustering a bill would actually then file the dilatory amendments, file the motions, do all of those things. And if we had 10 hours and we're doing the debate, and you really want to make those filibustering a bill go through their paces to do that, I think that makes some sense. At the same time, it's not always clear an hour or two in if a bill is going to get filibustered. We've had in this body over the last couple of years instances in which, it sort of feels an hour and a half in, 2 hours in, you've got a lot of opposition, but then maybe it sort of fades on its own. But what I think this would do is, in order to avoid having an early cloture, what would be a de facto early cloture vote, those who oppose a bill would just say, hey, let's just get some things on the board and start fighting this thing, which I just think encourages some of those dilatory actions. And so ultimately, I appreciate Senator Hansen's comments, and I think his comment about saying, hey, if I were to do this again, I may not have done it differently, is exactly why we should be talking about it this morning. Because how these rules are – this rule may not come up again. Thank you, Mr. President. This rule may not come up again in a year. It may not come up again until next session when different members of the body are here. But I think these are to be able to talk through this, understand why we did it, understand what the chair did, why the chair did it, why some of us voted against overruling the chair in that context, and how that's separate from the bill itself. I just think could not be more important. And I would just say, as maybe a public service announcement to my colleagues, that there is actually a book, you may not know, but there is a sort of book or set of precedents. I mean, it's not a legal precedent like we would think in the reporter, but the clerks, over the decades, the clerk's office has tried to track write down or record or keep a record of various decisions like this one, where there's a debate on the floor, there's a point of order, there's a question before that the chair has to rule on, maybe there's a motion to overrule the chair or some other issue of our procedure. And I've spent a lot of time in those precedents, and I think it's very valuable, that kind of institutional knowledge, especially in the age of term limits, for us to understand the procedure and process and rules and why we have them.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hilgers. Senator Slama, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of LB 339. This truly is a cleanup bill, and I encourage a green vote on it. Since today's discussion has veered into the events of yesterday, I thought it may be worthwhile to examine the value of transparency in our government. To do so, I'd like to reference a few articles I find to be of interest. I'm not sure how many of these we'll get to today, or if I'll even get through the first one in my turns. The first article I'd like to reference is from the Utrecht Law Review, which is entitled The 6 Faces of Transparency, written by Agnieszka Budzize in July 2013. This particular article was written in reference to the EU, but I think it represents several lessons that we can relate to yesterday's events. In this article, Budzize determines that there are 6 different ways in which transparency influences our government. The first reason he references is democracy. Of course, in the United States, we have a democratic republic, but the point still stands. Democracy. First, transparency is said to contribute to democracy. The availability of information can fuel the public debate and helps with the process of will formation. In other words, it facilitates public decision-making. It enables citizens to determine what they, as a society, want to do. In addition, transparency is considered a necessary, albeit not sufficient, condition for participation, which allows people to exert influence on different types of governmental activities, and for accountability, which ultimately allows people to judge government actions and attach consequences to them. The second theory that Budzize proposes in this article is increasing trust and legitimacy. Transparency is often thought to increase the legitimacy of government institutions, as well as the trust that citizens have in them. This in turn improves the efficacy of the institutions, as people are more inclined to accept their decisions, and enforcement costs will be lowered. Whether transparency actually has these effects is debatable, but there is sufficient evidence to show that this is acceptable as fact. The third reason that Budzize presents is quality of governance. Transparency is thought to contribute to the quality of governance in several ways. According to Andiek and Ten Burge, high-quality governance requires that the government fulfills its tasks in accordance with the norms of the rule of law and democracy, and in an honest and impartial way. Transparency can contribute to the observance of the rule of law and promote integrity among public officials. The mere fact that officials know they are being watched and that the quality of their work can be checked is thought to improve their performance. On our end, this means that I can wave hello to everybody tuning in on NET this morning. Transparency also enables the supervision of public officials, both by their superiors and by the courts, and makes it possible to impose consequences on public officials that shirk their duties or display other undesirable behavior. Enabling supervision is acknowledged by the Commission, so this is again referencing EU government structure, but it's still helpful here, to be one of the purposes underlying the introduction of access to information in the member states. Thank you, Mr. President. As it brings checks and balances that improve the control of government organs. It also played a role in the introduction of many transparency obligations in the Union and in the interpretation given by the courts of particular transparency obligations. The argument plays a role in the supervision of administrative authorities by hierarchically superior authorities, in review by the courts and by the addresses of decisions and stretches across many fields of law. Preventing arbitrariness and nepotism is an important goal of public procurement regulation and an important reason to introduce transparency in this field. The fourth theory presented by Buchize is economic performance and market efficiency. Fourth, transparency is argued to increase economic performance and market efficiency.
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Pansy Brooks, you're recognized. Senator Pansy Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just am rising to thank Senator Hansen for his courage yesterday. He was attempting to get a vote on the issue, and most of us have experienced the aggravation on our bills when we get to a 3-hour mark and we can't get to a vote. Now, I'm not critical of the Speaker because that's a rule that we have voted on. But again, this issue has been raised today yesterday, because at what point, when there are 14 people in the queue, there isn't full and sufficient debate to be able to call the question, yet we're 5 minutes away from being told you've had fair and full and sufficient debate, and we can't have any more debate. It's getting pulled unless you have 33 votes. So again, this is a rule that the Speaker created and we have agreed to, but I do think that it's wise to look at it in the concept of reality. There was an article today by the Lincoln Journal-Star editorial board criticizing our body for the lack of transparency and for the number of not voting votes, being present but not voting. Now, one of the things that the Journal-Star left off was the fact that often the president not voting vote is a soft no. It's a way to be cognizant of a colleague's hard work and and a desire to say no in a soft way. But by using this 3-hour rule, we really are avoiding many of the tough stands. I believe that in a way we are not being transparent enough to the constituents to bring things to a vote. Again, Senator Hansen was brave to do this. On one hand, we're being told there wasn't enough debate, or there wasn't enough time to debate it, to call it to question. We were very careful about making sure that everyone that was still in the queue at that point had spoken. And I spoke with the Speaker, and in the past, in our first 2 years here, that was a standard. Now the Speaker says that's not a standard. He just looks at the number of people in queue, not whether or not they have actually had time to speak previously. So again, this is confusing, and I really think it was important to bring a vote, and to act as if that's not part of our rules and regulations, that we shouldn't have been bringing a vote, that we're threatened for questioning about bringing a vote. I don't think that's appropriate, and I do think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that as we are representing ourselves and our constituents, that our goal should be to vote. That's our ultimate goal. That's what we were put here to do. Soft no's, that is a type of vote. But again, we are avoiding some of the tough issues by that 3-hour rule. So, and I understand the Speaker needs to move things along. So no one envies his job, and we appreciate the work he's doing. It's just interesting to, I want the public to understand what some of that discussion is about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansy Brooks. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to go back to visiting this bill about the nominated commissions. Would Senator LaGrone respond to a question?
Senator LaGrone, would you please yield?
Absolutely.
Senator LaGrone, it's been kind of noisy today, but maybe missed some of what you had to say about the nominating commissions. I had a question, if you can tell me, how the people, I heard that attorneys elect the attorney part, the laymen, how are they selected? Are they appointed or not?
They're appointed by the governor, and I forget the exact wording of the statute, but essentially two of them, no more than two of them can be from one political party. So essentially the most you could have is 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats or some other combination that leads to no more than 2 members being of the same political party of the laymen.
And are you comfortable with that, or are you proposing that something different should be done?
No, I think the membership of the commissions is spot on. I think that it adequately addresses the problems that come with other selection methods that Senator Lathrop laid out. I'm just saying, I think in the operations of the commission, which I'll get into a little later, I won't do that on your time, there can be some more transparency in how we go about that.
All right, do you mean as to publishing the votes that they take?
Actually, there's a Supreme Court opinion on that. I think that might be, and I say might, seriously there, might be one thing. There are reasons that some don't feel that that is a good idea, and I think that's a discussion that needs to be had. I also think that issues in the election of the lawyer members could also lead to more transparency.
So their votes are not published at this time?
I mean, you know who made it, who got a favorable vote and who did not get a favorable vote. You do not know how the members of the commission voted. I see.
All right. I think that's all I needed, but I yield my time to Senator LaGrone if he wants it.
Senator LaGrone, 225.
Thank you, Senator Clements. And I had been speaking with Senator Chambers off the mic, and I'm going to ask him to yield to a question because there's a story he often tells that I think is really relevant when we're talking about the election of judges. So would Senator Chambers yield to a question?
Senator Chambers, would you please yield?
Yes, I will.
So Senator Chambers, real quick before we get into that, since that's more of a discussion of a time I wasn't listening to you well enough, and so I'm going to need you to fill in some of the details for me. I want to show that I generally do listen to you when you're speaking on the floor. Isn't it true that in the past you have claimed that some people do not listen to you when you're speaking here on the floor?
Yes.
And do you remember, I believe it would have been the 2014 session when then Senator Bo McCoy was running for governor, you indicated that you made actually, let me put it this way. Have you ever lost a wager that you have made on this floor, Senator Chambers?
I can't say for sure, but if I have lost it, I don't recall right now.
Well, I would submit that you have, and that is because I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe in the 2014 session, you wagered that no member of this body who was then serving would ever serve as governor. Is that correct?
Be elected to serve, right. And I know what you're getting at, that in the listing of the people who would be sitting in the governor's chair when the governor and certain other people were not there, somebody who was running for governor at that time might have sat there, but that person would not have been the governor.
Okay, I thought that it was serve as governor, but the point being made there, we'll pass over that now and get to where I was going with this. When we're talking about the election of judges, the reason that, as many have pointed out, that that's a bad idea is if they're supposed to uphold justice, and yet when you have individuals outside contributing to them, it can be kind of like a bait and switch. And that kind of reminded me of the story you have often told of the turtle and the fence post. Could you refresh?
Senator?
Sorry?
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements, LaGrone, and Chambers. Senator Pansy Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just rising to add that after my comments thanking Senator Hansen, I also wanted to just say I stand in support of LB 339. It's highly necessary. We heard the testimony, and opposed to Amendment 416. And with that, I'll give my time to Senator Lathrop if he wants it. Do you want time? Okay. Nope, I'm done. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Pansy and Brooks. Seeing no one wishing to speak, Senator LeGrone, you're welcome to close on AM 416.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Chambers, would you yield to a question?
Senator
Yes,
Chambers,
I will.
would you please use?
Okay, right before, thank you, Senator Chambers, right before we got caught off that last time, I had asked you about basically your bait and switch story about the turtle and the fence post. Could you refresh us on that?
And I'll do it rapidly because it's on your time. There was a guy, he wasn't too smart, and he was walking down a country road, and there was a turtle sitting on a fence post, and the turtle got this guy's attention, and the guy looked because he'd never heard a turtle talk before, so he went over and they had a conversation, and the turtle said to this fellow, "If you will take me down from this fence post, I will grant you 3 wishes because I'm a magic turtle." And the guy thought about it. He said, "Okay." And he took the turtle and set him on the ground, and the turtle started ambling away in the method that turtles use to amble. And the guy said, "Wait a minute, Mr. Turtle. You said you're magic, and if I take you off the fence post, you would grant me 3 wishes. Well, aren't you going to do that now?" He said, "If I was magic, I wouldn't have been sitting on that fence post that long."
Thank you, Senator Chambers. And honestly, I think that really, one, I like that story, but 2, I think it's kind of similar to the election of judges in that, we'll be, fair and balanced, and then, but you give us money, and so then there's obviously a self-indication there. And actually, I'm not going to take too terribly much longer, because I think this brings us to the point of where we're currently at with Nebraska's judicial selection process. So I do have 2 more things I want to get into. That is something I spoke with Senator Clements about, the votes of the commissions, and then I want to touch on an article that was written by now Judge Graz on the transparency issues that these face. I obviously won't have enough time to do that on this, but we'll get as far as we can. And actually, I don't think that it's going to be necessary to take any of these amendments to a vote, but we'll get to that when we get there. So currently, as I indicated, the votes of members of the commission are not, how each commissioner voted is not made public. And that was the issue, that was an issue in the case of Marks v. Judicial Nominating Commission for Judge of the County Court, 20th Judicial District.
Minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as I indicated, I can get into this more on the time on the actual bill. So with that, I'll withdraw all of my amendments.
Just to specify, you are withdrawing AM 416, 417, and 418?
Correct.
Without objection, so ordered. Moving back to LB 339, Senator LeGrone, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So again, just quickly, I think I can do it with my time on this bill. I want to get a little into the Marks case and then get into the article that Judge Graz wrote. So essentially in Marks, what was at issue was it was a declaratory judgment on whether or not these votes were to be made public. And the court held that, well, the court said, we'll start off with that and then we'll get into the actual holding. So section 24.801 to 24.812, I'll just read from the opinion, that'll be simpler. There can be no question that 24.801 to 24.812 constitute a special independent legislative act complete in itself, which is intended to cover the entire subject of the selection of nominees by judicial nominating commissions. It contains broad provisions concerning procedural methods to be used by nominating commissions in selecting judicial nominees. 24.809, in accordance with the Nebraska Constitution, provides in part, in selecting or rejecting judicial nominees, said commission shall vote by oral roll call vote It is of some significance that neither the Constitution nor the statute provides that the vote shall be public or taken at a public hearing. Furthermore, 24.812 specifically provides that all communications between members of the Judicial Nominating Commission shall be confidential. 24.810 sub 2 provides for a public hearing which any member of the public shall be entitled to attend at the hearing to express either orally or in writing his or her views concerning candidates for appointment to judicial vacancies. 24.810.3 provides in pertinent part, after the public hearing, the nominating commission shall hold such additional private or confidential meetings as it determines to be necessary. Additional information may be submitted in writing to the Judicial Nominating Commission at any time prior to its selection of qualified candidates to fill the vacancy. When read as a whole, the language appearing in 24.801 to 24.812.01 is plain, direct, and unambiguous. It provides that a Judicial Nominating Commission may select or reject judicial nominees after public hearing in a private or confidential meeting, provided the vote is taken by an oral roll call vote. And it's in his petition, Petitioner Marks prayed that the court find the March 27, 1987 nominations made by the Judicial Nominating Commission were void because of its failure to comply with the provisions of the Nebraska Public Meetings Law. In particular, Marks argues the Public Meetings Law prohibits the selection of nominees in a closed session. Marks' contention in this regard fails for at least two reasons. First, it's clear that the Judicial Nominating Commission sections are special statutes concerning the selection of judges by nominating commissions. The Nebraska Public Meetings Laws are general statutes relating to public meetings, and obviously a general maximum of statutory interpretation, I'll spare you the analysis, is that when there is two statutes on point, one general, one specific, the specific controls. 84, I'll skip ahead so we can get past that. So essentially, the court held that this vote does not have to be public. And so I think that creates an issue of transparency in the question of how did each commissioner vote. If these commissioners, well, since these commissioners are the ones that represent the public on these commissions, and that is the part that, as Senator Salama so readily pointed out, the need for transparency in all of our governmental institutions. They're the ones that effectuate that purpose as it relates to Nebraska's judiciary. I think that creates a bit of an issue. And it's led to a lot of speculation on what that issue, why that is the case, which I will get into more deeply when my next time comes on. But essentially, now Judge Graz wrote a lengthy article on judicial nominating commissions and why some people are concerned about the lack of transparency. And I'll cover some highlights from that on my next time on the mic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator LeGrone. Senator Lathrop would like to welcome the following guest, Will Katharian from Omaha. He is seated under the north balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized by the Nebraska Legislature? Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 8, 124, 127, 139, 156, 160, 195, 319, and 699, all placed on final reading. Your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 284, 318, and 443, all to select file. I have a reference committee report for a gubernatorial appointment. New A bill, LB 130A by Senator DeBoer, would appropriate funds to carry out the provisions of Legislative Bill 130. And finally, a series of notice of committee hearing, all from the Revenue Committee. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returning to debate, Senator Bosselman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, Nebraska. Good morning, constituents. Seems like we're having a conversation about this going in several different directions this morning. So something we talked about earlier with Senator Chambers, which was very interesting, and Senator Chambers is also pretty knowledgeable or on this area when we're talking about our United Federation of Planets. And during some conversations, I've heard Senator Chambers talk with Senator Coulterman and call Senator Coulterman a smart aleck. And I'm wondering if Senator Coulterman would yield to a couple questions.
Senator Coulterman would be so kind to yield.
I guess I will.
Well, Senator Coulterman, thank you for yielding. And are you familiar with the United Federation of Planets?
No, I am not.
You know, we're talking Star Wars a little bit here, and a little bit about Star Wars and futuristic things from the past. That's some stories that are online, and I think some of them kind of apply to Nebraska. And let me explain. This is my question. Nebraska is cold now, like the ice planet Hoth, where tauntauns live and roam. Do you know what a tauntaun is?
Is that something you eat?
No, it's something. It's a large creature. Tauntauns have white fur and downturned horns, so they're a really large creature that you actually can ride on. They feed off of lichen, moss, and fungi found in the ice on the planet in the grottos. They sometimes scavenge on frozen flesh and small rodents, and they are the primary prey of the wampas. Do you know what a wampa is?
A llama?
A wampa.
A wamba?
W-A-M-P-A.
No, I have no clue what that is.
Well, a wampa is like, I would call them like a yeti or a snow monster that lives in caves that actually eats the tauntauns.
Are they still alive today?
Well, yes, they are. They are on planet Hoth. So they are the primary of the prey animal of the tauntauns, and they are used also as mounts. And mounts is like a horse. You're going to ride the horse. Do you know who actually rides the tauntauns?
I have no idea.
And you're the smart aleck in the bunch. I'm not understanding. Well, Luke Skywalker actually rode the tauntauns.
Luke who?
Skywalker.
Okay.
Yeah. So they are used as mounts, and the wampas are the carnivorous natives to Hoth, and it's difficult for the riders to track the wampas because they want to keep the tauntauns alive because they don't want them to take their rides away or their means of transportation. Another question I have to you, that we have the banthas of Tatooine. Have you ever heard of Tatooine?
Can I add, are we talking Star Trek or Star Wars?
I think
because you said it was something about the Federation of Planets and
right,
Star
we're
Trek.
Jumping between the two.
It's Star Wars, isn't it?
Okay, yeah, there you go.
But I don't know.
You are the smart aleck man.
Yeah.
So,
but I don't know.
You don't know what banthas? Banthas are a social creature, and the Tusken Raiders. They're a band of people, and they use them as mounts. Also, it's a large furry creature.
Are they from Italy? Tusken?
No, they're not. They are from the planet of Tatooine.
Tatooine?
Now the Duboks are also reside on Tatooine and are large reptilian creatures, and they're used as beasts of burden. Did you know that?
No, I do not.
Well, and I thought
I never saw that movie.
Well, we're going to have to get those two. And I thought as a smart aleck person within the body here, you would know answer some of these questions.
Well, you picked a loser today.
Well, thank you, Senator Coulterman. I guess we have some movies we need to watch together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostoman and Senator Coulterman. Senator LaGrone, you're recognized.
Thank you, President Hughes. Just going back, as I indicated, Judge Graz previously wrote an article on some of the issues with Nebraska's judicial appointment process. And one of the main problems with the lack of transparency is a lot of times it really breeds a lack of trust. And there can often be speculation as to why that lack of transparency exists. And so now I'm going to go into the article by Judge Graz, and I think there's a few highlights I'd like to point out. And he says, however, and starts off with him quoting from another article, so this is from another article. However nobly the Missouri Plan began, the current process is doing no favors to fairness or to justice. Missouri's courts are every bit as hung up in politics as they are in many other states. The difference is that in Missouri, the process happens behind closed doors. A democratic system of choosing judges requires a transparent process and accountability for those who make the choice. And then he goes back into his comments of some say that a number of recent members of the nominating commission have been partisan, which, if true, could undermine the intellectual basis and policy justification for removal of the public's right to select judges and transfer of much of this power to a handful of members of the Bar Association. Now I'm skipping ahead. Most politically active and interested members within the bar tend to be heavily invested in a single political party. Again, skipping ahead, unlike most elections in Nebraska, Bar Association members who are registered as members of one political party can vote to select nominating commission members who assertedly represent the other political party. In other words, the Republican Commission members can be selected based on the votes of Democrats, and the Democratic members can be selected based on the votes of Republicans. This design allows the dominant or best organized voting bloc to select highly partisan members to represent their own party and nominally partisan or apolitical members to represent the other party. Such a process is in tension with Nebraska's election statutes, including the Nebraska primary, which is currently a closed contest. So that's one of the issues that some people have pointed to, is the lack of transparency can cause an assumption of behind-doors partisanship. Another issue that is pointed out in the article is the assumption that there might be some undue influence by special interest groups, and I'll quote from that section. Some who have studied the commission have pointed to evidence from reviews of recent nominating commission member rosters, interviews with judicial applicants, and interviews with nominating commission members that there's a significant level of influence by special interest groups on the commission members. Observers say that there are a number of interest groups which potentially disproportionate influence, including the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, the Nebraska Association of Trial Attorneys, the Defense Counsel Association, and again, skipping ahead, along those same lines, there's some concern that this tilts the membership towards one philosophical leaning. And again, with that, I think that's a concern because I don't think that's the case. I think that our judges are selected in a very fair process. I think that opening it up and making it more transparent while keeping that same process could lend more trust to the process. And now, jumping ahead again on transparency and openness in the judicial nominating selection process generally, Judge Graz argued, he was not obviously a judge then, but argued that reform is also needed in the areas of transparency and openness issues in the process. Although this system is promoted as a means to ensure that judicial selection is based on merit, some say that the degree of secrecy is so pervasive that it results in a process with little or no accountability, thereby facilitating influence that is hidden and behind the scenes.
1 minute.
The judicial selection process The judicial selection process takes place behind closed doors, and the constitutionally required roll call vote is not only secret, and this is referring to the Marks case, which I covered earlier, and unreported, but often formality carried out following a series of secret straw votes by commission members who are encouraged to identify and promote candidates of their own choosing for a limited number of slots forwarded to the governor. Skipping ahead again, the Constitution provides that, quote, members of the nominating commission shall vote for the nominee of their choice by roll call, end quote. When this aspect of the process was litigated, and again, this is referring to the Marks case, the Nebraska Supreme Court relied on statutory provisions enacted to govern the judicial selection process.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator LeGrone. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Mr. President, I did a little bit of research on this bill because I noticed that Judicial District Number 2 was involved in this, and that's my district, which is Cass County, part of Odo and part of Sarpy. And I just wanted to ask Senator Lathrop a question.
Senator Lathrop, will you yield?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
I see that districts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 10 are treated differently in this bill than the other districts, and in how the commissions elect judges. And is it true that in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 10 that there are 2 different nominating commissions?
Yes, one for the county and one for the district court.
And the rest of the state, how does it work?
The rest of the state, they have one commission that takes care of both the district and the county.
Thank you. And that's what I wasn't clear when I was reading the bill that was true, but that is my understanding. And this had a little bit of an effect on my district. It's just a technical correction, and I do support the bill and don't have any problem with it. I would yield my time to Senator LeGrone if he still has some more that he'd like to say.
Senator LeGrone, you're yielded 3 minutes and 25 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Clements, because looking again at this, want to make sure I get a chance to get through it all, and then recap on my last time on the mic, and then vote in favor of 339. So where we left out on that was the quote from the Constitution of members of the commission voting by roll call vote. When this aspect was litigated, the Nebraska Supreme Court relied on statutory provisions enacted to govern the judicial selection process and did not analyze the meaning of the constitutionally mandated public hearing. The court stated that neither the Constitution nor the statute provides that the vote shall be public or be taken at a public hearing. The court did not discuss the purpose or utility of a constitutionally mandated roll call vote that is conducted entirely in secret following a largely perfunctory public hearing. According to critics, the state constitution requires that nominating commission proceedings afford greater public scrutiny and that roll call votes be made in public session. And that really gets to what I was speaking about earlier this year too, with when you're looking at the notion of the rule against superfluities. When there is language, whether it be in Constitution or in a statute, and more so when we're looking at a Constitution, that is in there that it is presumed that no language is superfluous, that every word is given meaning. And so when you have language in there that seems would theoretically have meaning but serves no purpose, that can kind of lend itself to say that might be viewing that language as superfluous, whereas if you look at it and afford it meaning, it might require something else, in this case a public roll call vote rather than a private one. And that's obviously something in the Marks case that the Nebraska Supreme Court has already made its interpretation clear on. I just think that as a policy matter, that is something that we as a body might want to look into in terms of opening up the transparency of this process. And I understand that there are reasons that some wouldn't want that to be the case, and that often deals with the attorney members of these commissions. If you are voting yes or no on someone to be forwarded to be a judge, number one, let's say that you vote no and they are forwarded to be a judge. Then what is your relationship with the then judge going to be like in your practice? Or let's say that it does fail, you're still going to have to work with that individual in the legal community, and then what is that relationship going to be like? So I know that there are some concerns there, but I do think that transparency overrides that and says that we should be taking a serious look at whether or not these votes should be public or not. With that, thank you, Mr. President, and I'll finish up on my last time on the mic.
Thank you, Senators Clements, Lathrop, and LeGrone. Senators, we have several groups to announce today. Senator Wishart would like to welcome 25 12th graders from Lincoln Northeast. They are seated in the north balcony. If you would rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. Senator Williams has 31 fourth grade students from Pershing Elementary in Lexington, Nebraska. They are also seated in the north balcony. Would you please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature? Senator Geist would like to recognize 25 students who are in the Waverly Middle School Jazz Band. They are seated in the south balcony. If you would rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. And lastly, Senator Moorfield has a group of Civic Nebraska Leadership Academy, and they are seated under the north balcony. If you would please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. Thank you all for being here. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fellow senators, friends all, I rise in full support of Senator Lathrop's bill, and with that I would ask that he would yield to a question.
Senator Lathrop, will you yield?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator, I've been listening very closely to what's been said on the mic. I'm a little confused about the shenanigans that are going on. Can you specify to me what you think the purpose is of what's being said on the mic? I'm a little confused. What does it truly have to do with your bill?
Well, I'm not sure.
Okay, so I'm not the only one that's confused.
Honestly, I don't. I know that Senator LaGrone is discussing the judicial nominating process,
right?
As he's reading some
long
law
paper.
review article or something done by somebody who's now a judge, but I'm not sure what the point is.
I wasn't sure about the point of the Star Wars, which I wished I'd been asked about it because I knew the answers. I appreciate that. Thank you, Senator Lathrop, because I want to know that I'm actually hearing what's going on correctly. With that, would Senator LaGrone yield to a question?
Senator LaGrone, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator LaGrone, when I asked you why this was dragging on and on, you said that you thought it was important for the public to understand the process. Is that correct?
Correct.
So do you feel that the longer you go on and the more information that you put out, that that's going to clarify what you've already said?
I felt that there was certain information that needed to be covered, and as I indicated, I pretty much, covered it now. I'm simply going to recap that, which is why I pulled all of the amendments, because I had the opportunity to cover it all.
Fair enough. Thank you. I worry because we are well into our session, and I certainly understand that everybody has the right to speak for or against bills. People have the right to filibuster bills. But I thought that this year's session got off to a really great start. We were knocking things out of the park. We were getting things said and done on this floor. And I feel that we're starting to go backwards with some of the shenanigans that are going on. And so I not only stand in support of Senator Lathrop's bill, but I just ask people to truly weigh the benefits of what is said on the mic, how many times it needs to be said on the mic, when you lose an audience's sense of wanting to pay attention to something. And I noticed that during the last 20 minutes that it's gotten very loud on the floor, that the body is no longer paying attention as well. And so please take these things into consideration. You like a bill, you don't like a bill, you want to get things on the record. I respect that, but some of the shenanigans need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blood, Senator Lathrop, and Senator LaGrone. Senator LaGrone, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as I said, I just wanted to quickly recap. And again, the reason I'm speaking on this is because I do think that when we have a bill come up that raises a topic that we rarely get to discuss and that often goes by the wayside, I think it's important to have a discussion on that to raise issues that might otherwise not get talked about. And I think the issue here is the full foundation of our judicial branch, and that is how we nominate judges. And I think that it is important to have discussion about whether there needs to be more transparency in that. And having covered what I've covered today, there are really the two aspects that I think we could better in terms of transparency with our process. And again, I'm not saying there's any, I think it is the best process for selecting judges that we have. But I think the two areas where we can improve and have more trust in the process is if we did have that roll call vote be public so that we knew who voted for whom, whether they advance, when they either advance or don't advance. And then also if we limited to the elections, since there are partisan offices on this commission, if we limited the election for those offices to the members of that party so that in that position they can we can be sure that they are representing that party and not necessarily members of the other party who they may have been elected by to represent this other party, which is a very odd method for election. That's not even like an open primary. That's I can't think of any other type of election that even compares to it. So I think those are the two areas where we can have some reform that can better transparency in this process and improve an already good process for selecting our judges to serve in the judicial branch of this state. And with that, I would encourage your green vote on 339. It is a cleanup bill. And with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator LeGrone. Senator Hilgers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just briefly, I think it's important to just make a point. I heard Senator Blood's comments, and I respect my good friend and seatmate at government committee very deeply. I do think it's important to not necessarily say on the, or at least for especially new members, there are issues that that individual members are passionate about, they're excited about, they like to talk about, and they will talk about them. They should be able to talk about them. And just because they speak about them on multiple occasions doesn't necessarily mean that they should be discouraged from doing so. Now, in the abstract, could that impact someone's credibility? Potentially. It depends on how often they do it, in what way that they do it. But I think I've known Senator LeGrone for a very long time, and it's not everyone's issue, but I know that he cares deeply about Judicial Nominating Commission, and he wants to get things on the record. And even if some people don't listen to every word that we have here on the floor, and I think they should, people out in Nebraska are watching what we say. They see what we're talking about. They read the transcripts later. And as far as I'm concerned, Senator LeGrone is making really good points about the Judicial Nominating Commission, an issue that a lot of people don't know about. And I appreciate him taking some time to go through it. And I think he has indicated on the mic and off the mic that the comments are wrapping up. We're going to take a vote on this bill. And so Senator LeGrone certainly does not need me to defend him on anything, but I do think it's important to put on the record, and for the new members, if there's an issue you care about, you should feel free to talk about it. And with that, that's all I have to say. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hilgers. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Lathrop, you're welcome to close on LB 339.
Well, this should probably be a simple close since it was a simple bill. It changed one numeral to correct an oversight last year in a previous bill that got passed. But I do want to respond very, very briefly. I didn't want to turn my light on every time I heard Senator LeGrone say something I didn't agree with. So the process of setting up and the process of a judicial nominating commission is set forth in our Constitution in Article 5. There are some statutory provisions. It doesn't work. I mean, there's no problem with it. It's not broke. I haven't heard anybody talk about a judge they didn't like, somebody that got through that shouldn't have. It works well. It works well, and I'll stand on the floor and defend it forever. That said, this is very, very, very simple. It just allows us to fix a problem, a drafting problem previously, and I would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. The question is the advancement of LB 339 to ENR initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
37 ayes, no nays on the motion to advance DNR.
The bill advances. Mr. Clerk, we will proceed to general file LB 340.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 340, introduced by Senator Lathrop, is a bill for an act relating to incarceration work camps. It excludes female offenders from placement in incarceration work camps, harmonized provisions, and repeals the original section. The bill was read for the first time on January 16th of this year and referred to the Judiciary Committee. That committee reports the bill to general file with no committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized to open on LB 340.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, you'll understand if I'm a little nervous about this. This is a very simple bill. I know you've heard that before. In fact, you've already heard it this morning. This one's right up there with the last. And hopefully we can move through this bill quicker. I brought LB 340 to address something that was brought to my attention by the Inspector General of Corrections. On a recent visit to the work ethic camp in McCook, he learned that the facility has a room reserved for women, despite it effectively being a male-only facility. He was told that current statute still allows judges to place women there, a law that goes back to when the facility was run by the Probation Administration. However, that's not been the practice for some time. The work ethic camp is now run by the Department of Corrections, and it's our understanding the department could use the room for other purpose. LB 340 is a simple fix that strikes references to women in the facility from a pair of statutes. This would allow the department to put the space to better use. LB 340 advanced from the committee without opposition, and with that, I would ask for your support of this bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about LB 340. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Bowles, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Lathrop, we're testing your patience on your bills today. You're trying to move things through your committee, and I respect that. But I think that you concur with some of the concerns that I'm going to raise on the mic today related to the staff of our Department of Correctional Services, which is in fact related to the substance of the bill, the folks who are doing the work at the work ethic camp. And I rise on the mic today to raise my concerns related to recent decisions made in our CIR process. An article from the Omaha World Herald that I'd be happy to provide colleagues a copy of reports out the findings that a state labor court ruled that a raise in pay is not justified for Nebraska corrections officers who have long complained about excessive overtime and high turnover and lower pay than county jailers. And the court also rejected the employee's request in the order for step increases for longevity pay, which workers said would be key to stemming an exit of state corrections officers to county jails, which offer wage hikes for years of service. Colleagues, whether it's the work ethic camp or Diagnostic and Evaluation Center or the Omaha Community Correction Center or any other aspect of our Department of Correctional Services, our workers are the heart of the work, and they are essential not only to keeping our system running under tough circumstances, but also to keeping our communities safe. And that's not just my opinion. That is the finding of several reports that have been published by the Department of Correctional Services themselves. In 2016, they completed a study related to the culture of staff. The study found experienced staff members mentor and teach new staff the nuances of corrections work that can only be learned from actually doing the job. They do this because they are teammates, regardless of tenure, and because it is how we keep each other safe. Compensation should be linked to the skills and knowledge to do the job effectively and safely. Another report from the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services regarding overtime stated that keeping quality trained staff is important for maintaining staff and secure prisons in Nebraska. Not only are staff responsible for keeping offenders and the public safe, they play a vital role in the rehabilitative process for offenders. Furthermore, the ability to retain trained professionals committed to the successful offender reintegration into society protects all Nebraskans. So, colleagues, I remain incredibly concerned about the decisions that were made in our state labor court. I have received some information that it is possible that the state will come back with one of their offers previously that has a 2% increase plus a 0.3% merit proposal for these correctional officers. It's my sincere hope that those decisions get made. But whether they do or they don't, it is time for us to pay more attention to the staff who've been working in stressful conditions for over 6 years. We have been overcrowding and understaffed for a significant period of time. The last time I checked, we were at 157% of capacity. So this is my opportunity to say, what can the legislature do? And one of the things that the legislature can do is to take a hard look at my bill, LB 109, which went to the government committee and would institute legislatively step raises for those correctional officers who are working on the front lines: corrections corporals, corrections sergeants, and corrections caseworkers. Colleagues, I think it's time for us to step up and lead on this issue. I think it's time for us to support the staff members that keep us safe. I think it's time for us to look at LB 109, and I think it's time for the Department of Correctional Services and the administration to reconsider the 2% and the 0.3% for those officers. I appreciate Senator Lathrop's patience as I say my piece on what is only an aspect of LB 340, but is an important aspect of LB 340, the people who do the work. With that, I'll ask you to advance LB 340, Senator Lathrop's bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bowles. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Lathrop, you're recognized to close on LB 340. Senator Lathrop closes or waives closing. The question is the advancement of LB 340 to ENR initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
38 ayes, no nays on the motion to advance to ENR.
The bill advances. Mr. Clerk, we will now proceed to general file LB 141.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 141, introduced by Senator DeBoer and others, is a bill for an act relating to crimes and offenses, changes provisions relating to strangulation, prohibits suffocation, changes penalties, and repeals the original section. The bill is read for the first time on January 11th of this year and referred to the Judiciary Committee. That committee places the bill on general file with committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator DeBoer, you're welcome to open on LB 141.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. LB 141 is a bill that addresses what I see as an inconsistency in our laws that impact, among other people, domestic violence victims. Currently, if the facts show that a victim has been strangled, prosecutors can charge the assailant with a felony. And if the only slightly different facts show that the victim has been suffocated, the assailant is charged with a misdemeanor. This bill would allow all assaults on a person's airways to be treated the same. In the Nebraska criminal statutes, the general crime of assault is split into 3 degrees, first, second, which are felonies, and third, which is a misdemeanor. The difference between a felony and a misdemeanor assault depends on the type of harm which the victim sustains. So generally, felonies for serious bodily injury or any injury with a dangerous instrument, and misdemeanor assault for menacing threats and or a lesser bodily injury. In addition to these generic assault provisions, Nebraska statutes recognize certain specific types of assault with greater specificity. Assault by strangulation is one of those specifically enumerated assaults, and this bill would include suffocation within that specific assault. In part, this specificity is necessary because of the unique nature of cutting off a person's ability to breathe. Unlike other types of physical harm, whose severity generally corresponds to the injuries sustained, impeding one's airways leaves relatively little injury right up until the point of death. Without specific enumeration, a very nearly fatal assault involving preventing someone from breathing would likely only be chargeable as a misdemeanor. Nebraska's current law, however, recognizes the unique nature of airway assaults, and 28-310.01, as currently in place, provides for felony charges for strangulation. This bill would also include suffocation because of its similar nature and danger. To illustrate the difficulty in the current statute, charging assailants under the current law requires the application of pressure on the throat or neck of the other person. On the other hand, sitting on someone and crushing them to the point they can't breathe, or holding your hand or a pillow over someone's mouth and nose, both acts of suffocation, are not covered by 28-310.01. And again, while these could be charged as assaults with lesser penalties, this bill would allow for these acts to be charged in the same way as an assault by strangulation. This is a particularly interesting timing of this bill, because I will point out that just last night, my nephew got a water bottle cap lodged in his throat, and luckily his teacher performed the Heimlich on him and was able to maneuver it enough that he could breathe to get to the hospital. And I want to thank all of the wonderful people at Emmanuel and Children's Hospital who saved his life last night. But this pointed out to me in very clear detail how vulnerable human airways are and how much we need to make sure that we are protecting people from these kinds of assaults. Many groups testified in support of LB 141, and it was passed unanimously out of committee. While the Nebraska Criminal Defense Attorneys Association testified in opposition to the bill initially, in part because of the intent standard in the initial bill, the committee amendment AM 145 addresses these concerns, and they're no longer opposed. Thank you for your consideration of this important legislation, colleagues, and I urge you to pass 141 along with Committee Amendment 145 on to the next round of debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. As the clerk stated, there are amendments from the Judiciary Committee. Senator Lathrop, as chair of the committee, you're recognized to open on the committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, good morning once again. LB 141 was heard by the Judiciary Committee on January 23rd and was advanced to general file with committee amendments. Both the amendments, AM 141 and the motion to advance to general file, were on 7-0 votes with one member absent. The amendment is a white copy that replaces the original provisions of LB 141. It adds suffocation to the offense of strangulation and defines it as impeding the normal breathing of a person by covering the mouth and nose. Language is added that the offense does not require a visible sign of injury, and we have removed recklessly as one of the intent elements in the original bill. The amendment also moves the pregnant women enhancement to Section 28-115, where other enhancements for offenses against pregnant women are located. I would urge your adoption of the amendment as well as advancing the bill to select file. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Debate is now open on LB 141 and AM 145. Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President, I was not present when this bill was voted on, so I did not have an opportunity to discuss the amendment, but I would like to ask Senator Lathrop a question or two if he would respond.
Senator Lathrop, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator Lathrop, would you look at the white copy of the amendment? And
okay,
I'm looking in line 2 at the original language. I have always wanted it to say knowingly and intentionally. You could know that you're doing something, for example, putting your hand over somebody's nose, but it may not be with any intent to do any harm. On the other hand, you could intend to do something, that act, but you don't know that it's going to be hurtful. So what would you say to striking that or and substituting and? I know that any number of statutes will have, instead of the disjunctive, it will have the conjunctive and.
I think that makes perfect sense.
Okay, and that's all that I would ask then. And here's why I'm saying that. Just to let people know that when I look at a word, it's not to nitpick or hurt the bill. You could put your hand over somebody's nose and mouth saying, shut up, and they won't stop talking. So you put your hand over, and parents have done that with their children. They'll put the hand over the nose and mouth. Teachers have done it. So there should be an element of an intent to do some kind of harm, but you still don't have to have a visible injury. And since Senator Lathrop does not object, I will go ahead and offer that amendment, but I wanted the record to show why I was looking at it with reference to this bill. So I'd like to ask Senator Lathrop a question. Would you rather we just let it go and then this occur on select file?
Well, it's Senator DeBoer's bill.
Oh.
I'm just introducing the amendment. I'll let Senator DeBoer make that judgment. Senator
I'd like
Chambers.
to ask Senator DeBoer a question, if she would respond.
Senator DeBoer, will you yield?
Yes, but you might have to catch me up because someone else was talking to me.
Well, here's all I'm asking. The amendment that I would offer is to strike the word or and insert the word and.
Yes.
My only question is, would you want to do it here or let the bill go and then it be done on select? It doesn't matter to me.
We can do it now.
Okay. Then somebody's going to have to say something to give me time to do that.
All right, let's do it on select then.
Okay. Okay. That's all that I have then.
Thank you, Senators Chambers, Lathrop, and DeBoer. Senator Ben Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had a couple of questions pertaining to the amendment and the addition of certain language. And I think this would probably be best suited for Senator Lathrop if he would yield to a question, please.
Senator Lathrop, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
With the added amendment of increased, if I remember right, increased repercussions if the female happens to be pregnant. That's correct, right?
Yes.
How far along does a woman have to be in her pregnancy to be considered pregnant, according to this law?
I'd have to jump over. I'll have to leave the amendment. Do you know the answer? Senator DeBoer, I think, has the answer for you.
Cool. Thank you. Senator DeBoer, yield to a question, and the same one, please.
Senator DeBoer, will you yield?
I will. So your question was, why are we moving the enhancement portion?
Not so much why. It's more just need a little clarification about, it says, I get this right, if the offense was committed against a pregnant woman. I'm just kind of a little more curious about the terminology about how far along the female has to be along her pregnancy to be considered pregnant. Like, if she's 20 weeks, would the offense be increased, or if it's after 20 weeks? If there's any, just curious.
So this is actually part of the larger pregnancy enhancement statute which has been in place. The only thing which this amendment does, and which my bill did, was move it out of the strangulation special assault portion and move it over so that it was collected with all the other pregnancy enhancement statutes. So I actually don't know how many weeks it would be necessary, but I think that that's something that
I just know if that might be in state statute somewhere. Or
I'm sure somewhere that with the pregnancy enhancement statute. If you want me to look that up, I'll look for you, but maybe we can talk about that between now and select.
Okay, thank you. With this addition, I do want to congratulate certain senators for adding a pro-life amendment to this bill, because some might consider me, I am pro-life, and so I do want to just personally thank all of the, Senator DeBoer, and all of the co-signers, including Senator Blood, Bowles, Kavanaugh, Crawford, Dorn, Howard, Hunt, Lathrop, McAllister, Moorfield, Pansing Brooks, Quick, Vargas, and Wishart for the inclusion of this pro-life amendment. I think it's very important, and I think it's justifiable, and I just want to congratulate them on adding this into the bill. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Hilgers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of AM 145, LB 141, and the amendment that I think Senator Chambers, the floor amendment that Senator Chambers, I believe, has now had time to submit. Senator Chambers and I had some conversation off the mic on this particular point, and I agree with him. And just so the record's clear, the way that the intent, as I understand the bill, is to ensure that there is the assault for suffocation. We all sort of have in our mind what suffocation would be, but what we have in our mind, what the law says it is, can be two different things. And so I think the language here is, and how we define it and how it's pulled together, is, I think, really important. And what Senator Chambers identified was an issue, or was maybe some looseness in language or an issue in the language that might reveal itself down the road, and maybe make this bill be over-inclusive in a way that maybe we wouldn't think it would be today, or we don't intend it to be today. And so just to be clear, when Senator Chambers was referring to the disjunctive, the way the bill and the white copy amendment on page 3, lines 3 through 7, right now there's an or on subsection A and B. In other words, it's either one or the other, and it just takes one. One is necessary and sufficient for the offense to be committed, and the suffocation definition is just impedes the normal breathing of another person by covering the mouth and nose of the person, which, as Senator Chambers pointed out, could occur in instances in which someone is actually not trying to actually suffocate, as we would think as sort of the lay definition or consideration of the word. And so what I understand the floor amendment that Senator Chambers has submitted, which I support, is that the or on line 5 of page 3 that creates this disjunctive nature of the offense, it will be changed to an and, so it'll be conjunctive. So both A and B will have to now be present for this offense to have been committed, which I think tightens it up and ensures that we're not bringing in people that we don't intend to bring in, while also ensuring that the intent of the bill and the change is manifested. So with that, I would urge your green light on the amendment, and I think Senator Chambers' amendment, which he will put forward here in a minute. I just wanted to make sure that the record was clear on this particular point. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Senator Hilgers. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Chambers would move to amend with floor amendment 19.
Senator Chambers, you're recognized to open on floor amendment 19.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the record is clear. On page 3 of the committee amendment, in line 2, we would strike the word or and show it as stricken and insert the word and. Senator Hilger's discussion, my discussion, Senator DeBoer's agreement makes it an amendment which I don't think requires anything in the way of additional discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Chambers, you're recognized to close on your amendment. Senator Chambers waives. The question is, shall the amendment to LB 141 be adopted? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
42 ayes, no nays on the motion to advance the floor amendment.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Lathrop, you're welcome to close on AM 145. Senator Lathrop waives closing on 145. The question before the body is, shall 145 be adopted to LB 141? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
40 yeas, no nays on the adoption of the committee amendment.
Seeing no one else in the queue, the question is, shall LB 141 be advanced to ENR initial? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Excuse me. Senator DeBoer, you're welcome to close on LB 141. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to say, first of all, that I appreciate the floor amendment. This is a good amendment. It makes the bill better. So thank you all for voting that on. And I did want to address Senator Ben Hanson's concerns. The pregnancy enhancement statute has a burden of proof rather than so it's a question of fact to be determined by the fact finder. The prosecution shall allege and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the victim was pregnant at the time of the offense. It makes no further statement than that. And I do want to recognize that it is really important in these cases where a pregnant woman is concerned in some sort of physical assault, that she be given some extra protection, in part because she is at a defensive disadvantage when she is pregnant in that situation. So I think recognizing the defensive disadvantage of the pregnant woman is one of the reasons that we have these pregnancy enhancement statutes. And with that, I'll urge your green vote on Bill LB 141. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. The question for the body is the advancement of LB 141 to ENR initial. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
45 ayes, no nays on the motion to advance to ENR.
The bill advances. Mr. Clerk, we will proceed now to general file LB 354.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 354, introduced by Senator Pansing, Brooks, and others, is a bill for an act relating to the Nebraska Juvenile Code, protects confidential information in juvenile court case files, changes provisions relating to the sealing of juvenile records, provides for retroactivity, increases the penalty, and harmonizes provisions and repeals the original section. The bill was read for the first time on January 16th of this year and referred to the Judiciary Committee. That committee reports the bill to general file with committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Pansing Brooks, you're welcome to open on LB 354.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the body, LB 354 sets forth automatic record sealing procedures so children can move on with their lives after they have satisfactorily completed their probation, sentence, or diversion program. Colleagues, children make mistakes. This fact should not be surprising to any one of us. Those of us who have raised children or remember our own childhood experiences can certainly attest to this. What may be surprising to some of us is that many children are not able to move on from those mistakes after they have paid their debts, endured their punishment, and been rehabilitated. That is because of serious loopholes in our juvenile sealing statutes that leave children vulnerable and subject to ongoing negative ramifications. Nebraska has made a number of juvenile justice reforms in recent years, thanks to this body, informed by adolescent brain research in response to studies which recognize that children need to be treated differently than adults. Youth are still in the process of development and are more prone to risky, antisocial behavior, more susceptible to negative peer pressure, more impulsive, and less capable of thinking through the long-term consequences of their actions. Our juvenile justice system is supposed to be rehabilitative, seeking to, quote, hold juveniles accountable for their unlawful behavior in a manner consistent with their long-term needs, unquote, pursuant to Nebraska Revised Statute 43-402. In 2017, I brought a legislative resolution 216 as an interim study to examine the policies, practices, and laws that govern the safeguarding and sealing of juvenile records. Nebraska does have a statute governing the sealing of juvenile records. In the context of LR 216, I was able to speak with local juvenile justice stakeholders, county attorneys, judges, and others, and gather input on the effectiveness of our current statute and whether the intent of the statute, as currently written, is used currently in practice. LB 354 attempts to clarify the sealing process and make it less cumbersome. It also helps remove barriers that youth and families face when requesting their juvenile record be sealed. Nebraskans should not be defined by a lifetime of bad decisions they made as a teenager, Nebraskans should not be defined for a lifetime by the couple of bad decisions they made as a teenager. However, our current sealing laws are doing exactly that. Dr. Ann Hobbs from the University of Nebraska Omaha's Juvenile Justice Institute testified at the hearing and shared her staggering research. Her research clearly illustrates that sealing is not happening as intended. Of the 16,821 juvenile cases filed in 2017, 12,219 had closed and could potentially be sealed, but only a little over 20% of the cases had actually been sealed. Automatic sealing will fix this. Under LB 354, youths who successfully complete probation or complete the orders of the court would be able to have their record automatically sealed upon successful completion of probation or court orders. The current confusing process requires the court to send notice to the youth when they reach the age of 17, whether or not the case has been closed, and then to initiate a process wherein a hearing is held to determine if the record should be sealed. This is an unwieldy and oddly timed process, and the experts testified as such. It also places a burden on both the court and the parties to the case. Providing for an auto seal upon successful completion of probation instead will ensure that the juvenile who has demonstrated compliance with court orders and successful rehabilitation gets the benefit of a sealed record without this additional burden to all parties of further additional court proceedings. If the record is not automatically sealed, the juvenile or the juvenile's parents or guardian may file a motion to seal when the juvenile reaches the age of majority or 6 months have passed since the case was closed, whichever occurs sooner. LB 354 would also allow the state court administrator to permit viewing of sealed records for bona fide research. Failure to seal a record's youth when they have been assured it will be sealed can put them in an even worse position when they are applying for a job, for college, or for a professional association, while relying on the promises of our current statute to not disclose juvenile history. If a record is incorrectly left unsealed, the youth is not only seen as a criminal, but also viewed as dishonest by potential employers and landlords. The juvenile who has complied with what the state requires of them should not be expected to wear a lifelong mantle of public shame and punishment. We had a very good hearing on this bill. I was particularly pleased that the legislation had support from both the county attorneys and the criminal defense attorneys. I also want to thank the advocates, the criminal defense attorneys, the county attorneys, and the judges who initially brought me this bill. This bill advanced with 7 votes in favor and 1 absent. I ask you to vote green on LB 354 and the underlying amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansing Brooks. As the clerk mentioned, there are amendments from the Judiciary Committee. Senator Lathrop, as chair of the committee, you're recognized to open on that amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, morning, I guess, still. Good morning, colleagues. LB 354 was heard by the Judiciary Committee on January 31st and was advanced to general file with committee amendments. Both the amendment AM 112 and the motion to advance to general file were on 7-0 votes with one member absent. The committee amendment makes several small changes to the bill as introduced. It removes a section that would have prohibited any HIPAA information from appearing in the juvenile court public case file. The amendment addresses concerns raised by eliminating retroactively sealing records in situations where the county attorney declined to file, offered pretrial diversion, or filed in juvenile court. For those that are allowed to access a sealed record, the committee amendment requires identity verification to allow access. It also changes the standard for improperly disclosing a sealed record from negligently, recklessly, knowingly, or intentionally, and makes it simply knowingly. I would urge your adoption of the amendment as well as advancing LB 354 to select file. With that, I would appreciate your support and be happy to answer any questions I might be able to answer.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Seeing no one in the queue wishing to speak, Senator Lathrop, you're welcome to close. He waives closing on AM 112. The question before us is adoption of AM 112. All those in favor, please vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Have all voted that wish to? Senator Chambers, did you mean to vote? Thank you, Senator. Now has everyone voted? Please record.
32 ayes, no nays on the adoption of the committee amendments.
AM 112 is adopted. Returning back to LB 354. Seeing no one wishing to speak, Senator Pansy Brooks, you're welcome to close. She waives closing. The question before us is advancement of LB 354 to ENR initial. All those in favor, please vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Has everyone voted that wish to? Please record.
33 ayes, no nays on the motion to advance to ENR.
LB 354 is advanced to ENR initial. Next item, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 449, introduced by Senator Walz, is a bill for an act relating to the cosmetology, electrology, aesthetics, nail technology, and body art practice, defines the term, prohibits scleral tattooing, provides a penalty, harmonized provisions, and repeals the original section. The bill was read for the first time on January 18th of this year and referred to the Health and Human Services Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with no committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Walz, you're welcome to open on LB 449.
Thank you, Mr. President. LB 449 is an act that would prohibit the practice of using needles, scalpels, or other equipment to produce a permanent mark in the human eye, otherwise known as scleral tattooing, except when performed by a healthcare professional in the scope of the healthcare professional's practice. Scleral tattooing is the practice of using a needle to inject dye between the two layers of the eye. This changes the color of the eyeball, and I have no idea why in the world you would want to do that. There has not been extensive medical or scientific study on the issue at this time, and because it is not a traditional practice with tattooing, the individuals engaging in this practice are not likely to be trained to perform this task. Needless to say, there are a number of risks to an individual's health if they if they have this procedure performed on them by an untrained individual. With that, I would like to close or wait for my amendment.
Mr. Clerk, for amendment.
Mr. President, Senator Walz would move to amend with AM 349.
Senator Walz, you're welcome to open on your amendment, AM 349.
Thank you, Mr. President. The language in this change was brought to me by the Department of Health and Human Services. This amendment defines a healthcare professional in order to ensure that only a person licensed to practice medicine and surgery or osteopathic medicine and surgery are allowed to engage in this practice when this licensee is performing a procedure within the scope of his or her practice. It also allows for the department to apply civil penalties for violation of this act. With that, I would appreciate your support in advancing this bill onto select file. I see I missed.
Thank you, Senator Walz. Senator Howard, you're recognized.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to rise in support of the amendment and the bill. This was by far the most disgusting bill I have ever heard in my committee, and I've served on this committee for 7 years. What I did want to mention, though, was that essentially the bill prohibits eyeball tattooing by someone who isn't a physician. So there are instances where a physician may want to tattoo or change the pigment of an eye. For instance, if an eyeball receives an injury, there can be a white spot on the eye that only a trained and licensed professional should be making modifications to the eye. So with that, I urge the adoption of the amendment and the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Howard. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Walz yield to a question?
Senator Walz, would you please yield?
Of course.
Sorry I didn't give you a heads up. A question just occurred to me. Does this bill prevent people from doing it to themselves?
This bill would...
Their own eye?
No, it does not.
Okay, thank you. I yield my time to Senator Walz if she'd like it.
Senator Walz waives the additional time. Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Hunt, if you would like some images, Senator Arch, I'm sure, can share them with you. They're quite graphic and disgusting. And I hope that everyone will vote for this quickly so that we never have to discuss this again. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Seeing no one left in the queue to speak, Senator Walz, you're welcome to close on AM 349.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't really have too much else to say on this bill. With that, I'd like to ask you for your aye vote on both of the amendment and the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Walz. The question before us is adoption of AM 349. All those in favor, please vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Has everyone voted that wished to? Please record.
34 ayes, no nays on the adoption of the amendment.
AM 349 is adopted. Seeing no one in the queue to speak, Senator Walz, you're welcome to close on LB 449. She waives closing. So the question before us is adoption of LB 449. All those in favor, please vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Have all voted that wish to? Please record.
40 ayes, no nays on the advancement to ENR.
LB 449 does advance to ENR initial. Item is Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. New A bill, Legislative Bill 354A, introduced by Senator Pansy Brooks, a bill for an act relating to appropriations, appropriates funds to aid in carrying out the provisions of Legislative Bill 354. Amendment Senator Hilgers to Legislative Bill 617. Communication from the governor addressed to the clerk. Engrossed legislative bills 1, 2, 3, 12E, 33E, 33AE, 49, 67, 77, and 79E were received on February 28th. These bills were signed and delivered to the Secretary of State on March 6, 2019. Signed, Pete Ricketts, Governor. Amendment to be printed, AM 614 by Senator Bowles to Legislative Bill 481. The Business and Labor Committee will hold an exec session at noon in room 2022. A series of name ads, Senator Wayne to LB 104, Senator Ben Hansen to LB 304, Senator Kavanaugh to LB 518. And finally, Mr. President, a motion to adjourn by Senator Hilgers. Senator Hilgers moves to adjourn until Thursday, March 7th, 2019 at 9:00 a.m.
Colleagues, you've heard the motion. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed say nay. We are adjourned.